Hey, good evening. Welcome to Meteorology Lab. We're back for a Thursday evening here, getting a pretty good cumulonimbus anvil spreading over our area. Lots of storms out in the northwest Texas region. And that gives us kind of a different picture than what we've been getting the past week or so. Nice change from those clear blue skies. So, welcome back to Meteorology Lab. One thing I was going to do today, I was planning on showing some viewer severe weather pictures, and I did not get those lined up in the editor, so we're going to have to air that tomorrow, but that makes for a very good Friday segment. So, also, this will be a little bit short for a webcast. I've had a kind of a lot going on today, chase forecasting and stuff like that, and as you can see, there's not really that much severe weather going on. I mean, there are thunderstorms, but just not the classic spring Great Plains stuff. So I'd say probably about 30 to 45 minutes is about ideal for a show today. So let's go ahead and head right to it. We'll start with the surface map, and there's how things look right at this hour. So how do we read this? Well, it's probably best to not get hung up on all these H's all over the map. What I'm looking at is mostly the isobars. And that's those blue lines that you see there every 4 millibars. So the way we read those isobars is we try to find out where the real high pressure is. So instead of looking at that and that and that, what I'm doing is I'm looking at just kind of the bulk of the high pressure. So right in here there's a big 10-16 area. So it looks like some cool high pressure covering the Great Lakes area and the Appalachians. It looks like maybe even that extends down to the Gulf Coast. So maybe this whole area underneath high pressure. And it looks like maybe there's a little bit of overlap from that Bermuda high that you see out here on the edge. So maybe something like that going on there, kind of a mixture of the two highs. And then inland, we've got the very strong heating in the desert southwest right in there. It's kind of hard to see with all those H's, but it is there. And as a result, we're getting kind of a general flow of air into that low pressure area like that. So it's feeding out from the Gulf of Mexico and heading straight northwest into Colorado and New Mexico. And with this high pressure out of the Great Lakes area, that's feeding some cool air southward into the Chicago and Des Moines area. And that gives us kind of this convergence zone right there in Nebraska. So that's helping to keep the weather just a little bit unsettled there, although the ridge is keeping most of that capped. And then off the west coast, we've got the Pacific high out in that region. So that's a cool air mass in that region, and that also is feeding air into the low pressure region in the southwestern U.S. Taking a closer look at the Great Plains, here's what the map looks like, and you can see that we're up in the Dakotas today. Southeasterly flow across Rapid City and Pierre, all the way up to North Dakota there. And you can see the dew points are a little bit high in that region. You can see we got 63, 61, 63. That's pretty good for that area. It's normally what we see in July in those regions. So where the thunderstorms are are in the higher elevations close to the incoming upper energy. So we actually have to go a little bit northwest, and that takes us to Miles City, 84/62 in that area, 84/65 in Glendive. And this is where we've got thunderstorms developing, right where this moisture is outlined in green there. And I've got the Glasgow radar up. Let's take a look at that. There's Glasgow up in the northeast part of the state. Up north, some storms in Saskatchewan. But down south where we've got some chasers trying to get a few pictures for this spring. Got a little area of thunderstorms right there developing there between Miles City and Glendive. And it looked a little more interesting earlier. You can see that if we go back about 30 minutes to 45 minutes, the cells were a little bit more isolated, and we had this one really good cell here. Let's zoom in on that. So let's kind of go back to some of the severe weather basics, the radar basics. Anything unusual about this storm? Well, the reflectivity gradient is on the north side, up in this region here. So doesn't quite look like your typical right mover with a cyclone embedded in it. This is actually an anticyclonic storm, which is heading north. So most of the severe weather is on the north flank of that, especially close to this area of very high reflectivity. So there's probably quite a bit of good hail coming out of that. And let me see if I can do a cross-section, see if anything interesting shows up. And you can see the overhang is leaning to the north. So this is north, and then this is south over here. So what's happening here, it's not actually leaning over like that. What's actually happening is the inflow is feeding into that storm like that. And the precip is delayed till it gets into the higher parts of the storm. The formation process of precip doesn't happen until it gets up into this region right here. So that gives kind of a leaning appearance to the storm. And then as it falls out, you get all the precip right in the area there. And of course there is a corresponding right split. And that's this cell right here. Not quite as strong. So if we animate that, let me go back and animate this image, and you might be able to see the splitting. Nope, doesn't go back as far as the splitting, but one thing that you will notice is the right mover is slower. See how that cell down here just kind of sits there and the other is moving north? It kind of shows you the difference there in the motions. And looks like a few more splits peeling off from that storm. And finally, the right split becomes kind of dominant there near Shirley. Yeah, you can see it pulsing there, and another cell goes up. Let's see if it pulses again. Yep, there is another one right there. So this is definitely multicellular. And looks like it's about to get swallowed up by the MCS coming in from the southwest. So this is kind of an MCS in the formative stages. And this is how the rest of it looks there. This is all southwestern Montana. All right, let's go ahead and head into the maps. Just severe watches out this evening. Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, and then the Southern Watch in northwest Texas. Tropical cyclones, anything going on? According to NHC, not really. Nothing expected in the next 5 days, but at the end of next week, I think next weekend, we are expecting something developing in the Gulf there. So we'll check on the GFS shortly. Upper air, let's go to 250 millibars, which is up at 34,000 feet. It's been kind of a stagnant pattern. We've still got ridging in the Great Plains. There's the ridge axis right there, and those storms are forming very close to that ridge axis. So they're not getting too much help from the upper levels. The winds 40 knots. They are getting a little bit of shortwave energy. The storms that you see there in southeast Montana, those formed from a shortwave that was out here over western Wyoming earlier today. And because the flow is only 30 to 40 knots, it hasn't moved very much, only about 400 miles. So at this time, it's located about right there. We'll see if we can find it on the NAM graphic a little bit later. Some pretty good troughing coming into the west coast there. Whereas down in Texas, we're pretty much right under that ridge, and as a result, the storms in northwest Texas, they're a little bit disorganized. Check out the 700 millibar temperature to see what the cap looks like. Storms going up in southwest Montana close to this area here. That's going to be about 8 to 9 Celsius. And then in northwest Texas, storms got going actually right on the cap rock here where it was 14 Celsius. 14 Celsius is very high for 700 millibars, so what has actually happened is the very hot temperatures on the cap rock up to about 100 to 105 really getting those storms going, and these are definitely kind of heat-driven cells. So let me see if I can pan this down to south or northwest Texas. And it's cooled down a little bit this evening, but temperatures were over 100 in this area. And let me see if I can plot some of these, some of this data here. Yeah, that's all going to be outflow right in there. Even right here at Plainview, that's all going to be outflow. But down to the south, out around that, you can see the much... Well, there's even outflow in Dallas. Yeah, I thought the temperatures looked kind of cool in that area. So yeah, another outflow pool in that area, even down to Tyler and Longview. So we're going to put the outflow like that. But south of the outflow, you can see the temperatures are all above 90. And we got that southeasterly flow feeding up into especially this cluster right here. So these may continue for at least several hours this evening. Dry line. Do we have a dry line? Well, maybe. Southern part of West Texas there. Dew points are in the 50s here, and they drop off to the 40s, contrasting with 60s. So yeah, I would certainly say there's a dry line. So I'd probably put that maybe something like that right there. So the dripple point is located right there. And earlier today, before we had the thunderstorms blowing up, the dry line probably extended all the way up towards Amarillo. Okay, let's go ahead and move things along, and we'll go ahead and check out the... Let's look at the NAM. Since we have had some weather in Texas. Okay, there's what things looked like earlier. So this is going to be about 4 p.m. Looking at Texas and Oklahoma here. And looks like a pretty strong outflow boundary from last night's storms up in Oklahoma there. Temperatures are only in the upper 70s and low 80s. So starting out earlier this afternoon, pretty good outflow boundary located right there. So I remember the thinking was earlier that if we were able to get anything going up in this area, there would be a good chance that would interact with the boundary. And just to tell you what the models were thinking, the high-resolution rapid refresh, they were keeping the outflow boundary in this area most of the afternoon. Yeah, maybe even a little bit further north. So guess where it really ended up? I think the NAM has it pretty accurate here. Well, maybe even a little further south. Basically, the outflow boundary kept on going and just kind of outran what the high-resolution rapid refresh was showing. So, yeah, there is always a little bit of uncertainty when you're using the model output. And that's one of the reasons we turn to hand analysis and nowcasting to keep up on exactly what those boundaries are doing. Anyway, the storms did go up, and you can see this new meso-high area developing in the panhandles. So bringing this up to the current time, this is about where we're at right now. This looks pretty good here. That's about where the current thunderstorm activity is in northwest Texas. And then you can see on the backside, there's also a pretty good outflow boundary moving to the west and northwest. So what's going to happen over the evening? Let's run that forward. That outflow surges south through Abilene all the way down to San Angelo, almost to Fort Worth. It looks like it kind of dies out right there around Mineral Wells, maybe as far as Oklahoma City. So this is about 1 a.m. and yeah, it just kind of dies out. Most of the movement of that outflow pool is to the south. So it's going to head out toward the Edwards Plateau there. And then starting out during the morning hours, let's see what the configuration is going to be. Looks like an outflow boundary lurking to the south there. It's probably going to pull north during the day. And then another MCS up in the Springfield area. And that really gets going across the Ozarks during the afternoon. And then looks like we're looking at initiation further west for tomorrow evening. I think that ridge is really going to be dominating the weather for tomorrow in Texas. All right, time to head to the satellite. Let's do that. Well, there is a lot of thunderstorm activity, and I know people kind of prefer it when I cover their areas, but there's just too much thunderstorm activity all across the U.S., Florida, Texas, Colorado, so we're going to have to just kind of hit some of the key areas today. So the best place to start out with is going to be Texas, of course. Okay, let's roll that back. See how things look like earlier today. There's Childress located right here. Altus, Wichita Falls, and let's see what happens as we roll that forward. You can see the outflow from that Oklahoma thunderstorm, that complex there. Outflow is moving south. Meanwhile, out to the west, we've got the dry line and also a lot of heating. So the outflow is surging south around the Childress area, and then we get this congested cumulus area out around Turkey, Texas. And you can see the first cells going up right there. And we roll that forward a little bit more. Those cells really go up there, and they're positioned very well to intercept this outflow boundary. Although the outflow boundary is surging a little fast, I think, that could actually outrun the storms, but let's see what happened. Yeah, it picked up the outflow boundary and propagated right down that boundary into, it looks like, around the Knox City and Crowell area. And as we get towards the end, some pretty good gravity waves on that cell. Okay, up to the northern plains, this is Montana. Run that back. Beginning of the day, there's the earlier storm cluster up there near Glasgow. It's got a very fuzzy look, and that gives me the idea that it's in the process of dying out. There's a few bright elements right there and up here, but it's kind of on its way out. So we were looking out to the southeast here for new development, and also around the Grand Tetons, Yellowstone Park. You can see a lot of good cells going up in that area. So as we get out towards the early evening or the early afternoon, we have all these cells moving into the Butte, Montana area and rolling out into the high plains. So what we were hoping on was some isolated cells ahead of that cluster out in this area, but things were kind of slow to get going. And of course we did get that one. This is the one that you saw there on the radar, but eventually it got swallowed up by all this stuff. And as we get to the end, we just basically got ourselves an MCS in that area. And then in one more area, it's going to be Florida. So So this is how it looked earlier today. Thunderstorms went up early in Florida. Also a cluster out over the ocean waters in the Gulf of Mexico. And then we roll that forward. We see a very impressive cluster developing around the Fort Lauderdale area. Also, this cluster gets going really well. And both of them generate outflow boundaries. So we can see that one right there going across the Everglades out towards Fort Myers. And cells do try to get going along that outflow boundary, but it kind of looks like they get undercut, leaving these orphan anvils behind. And as we get towards the very end, we can see that outflow boundary right down here in the corner, surging southward. So, yeah, there's one good overshooting top there, and I think if you were out around, what are the cities here? Fort Myers, Sanibel Island. I think if you were enjoying the sunset there, you'd lose the light and see some very pretty lightning offshore. That would be certainly worthwhile to see. Okay, so let me go ahead and get caught up on the chat. As I mentioned, this is probably going to be kind of a short weathercast since things are kind of busy over here. Willie Greenway, great session, can feel it in his bones. I like the optimism. Michelle Curlin, always good. Don't you know it beats the heck out of social media? I appreciate that. Weather Forecasting Handbook, informative, fun, and fairly quick read, given the complexity, and I appreciate the comments, Michelle. Sue M., there in Indiana, checking in, and David Lumbert, Maumelle, Arkansas, 88 degrees over 66. Patrick Motes, last dry heat day in southeast Tennessee, humidity returning tomorrow. Shirley Keast, 63 in Michigan, another cool day, might climb up to 80 degrees. Erica Baker, Coffeyville, Kansas, 79 over 65. Wow. And click the like button, the thumbs up. Thanks. And I appreciate that. Willie Greenway received the Weather Radar Handbook and Weather Analysis Forecasting Handbook. Awesome. Well, you got some good weekend reading material. Ryan Toomey's joining us, and Burl H. and Carl Berghoff. David Moore reporting storms blowing through northwest Texas this evening. 70-mile-an-hour wind gusts, and yeah, I've been seeing some pretty high decapes all the way up and down the plains. I pulled a value out of southeast Montana, decape up near 1,500, and that's certainly way up there. And a lot of the Great Plains has been like that, so I guess we've just got a lot of very hot temperatures at the surface and dry air aloft, and those are kind of the ingredients that we need there. Ryan Toomey's severe weather hit his area with pea-sized hail, intense lightning. Willie Greenway likes the music. Excellent. Jamie Hammonds, Austin, Texas. Welcome to the webcast. Ryan reporting 93 there in southern Florida today. David Moore reporting tops of up to 58,000 in northwest Texas. And Shirley Keast mentioning her mom, Shirley. Best weather PT, big upper level low, approaching Portugal. Marine layer 2 stable. Okay, let's go ahead and head into that forecast. Wow, 0 drop frames. That's excellent. Okay, let me click the tabs here and get our window open, and I think we're ready. So starting out for tonight, there's that MCS, or, well, yeah, it's sort of a mesoscale system, but I don't know, it kind of looks, yeah, it's kind of like a small MCS right there in northwest Texas, and let's see what that's going to do for the next several hours. The one out west is going to become dominant, most likely, and I kind of agree with that since most of the moisture is feeding up towards that cluster there. So by midnight, it looks like that's probably going to be falling apart in the Abilene area. Abilene located about right there. And you can see that big meso. Where's that meso high? 1016. Yeah, it's going to be right around there where that meso high is. I guess that outflow boundary is kind of pushed on out ahead of that complex. And then by 4 to 5 a.m., it's mostly gone. A few elevated cells out there near the cap rock, and that's about it. So things will be dying down late, and about the only people that will get rain will be those west of Fort Worth, west of Wichita Falls. For the Central Plains, we've got those orographically induced showers moving out into the high plains. This is about where we're at right now, and you can see that most of those tend to die out during the evening. Then we just return to southerly flow. So this kind of shows you the setup we're going to have tomorrow. A wee bit of lee side troughing there in the Colorado area, maybe Wyoming. High pressure in the southeast and the east right there. So that's what gives us our southerly gradient. And embedded in that are going to be some outflow boundaries here and there, especially down in Texas. All right, so for tomorrow, we'll look at the upper level patterns, and looks a lot like yesterday. There goes that shortwave there that was producing the storms in Montana and South Dakota. In fact, if I roll that back, you can kind of see where it was earlier around midday. Not much movement on that, really. And then out in California, another shortwave trough through that area. So the setup for tomorrow morning is going to look like this here. MCS across the Dakotas, kind of distorting the upper level field right in the area. Here's that trough across eastern Nevada and eastern California. Big subtropical high across southeastern New Mexico. And a huge long wave ridge across the central U.S. So once again, the ridge is going to be plaguing us, and likely that's going to shut down the convection there in Texas for much of the day. So about the only place that we'll be able to get storms going is in the higher elevations out in that area right there. We'll go ahead and forward things into Saturday and Sunday, and you can see that huge trough coming on shore there in Oregon and Washington. Polar front jet will be making its reappearance in that area. And then we get this really strong slug of energy coming on shore around the Arcata and Eureka area on Saturday night. So it looks like kind of a rainy pattern for parts of Idaho, southern Oregon, and northern California. All that will be moving inland, and unfortunately it will be going north. I mean, we could really use some of that rain down here, but I guess that's not going to happen. So much of the energy will be heading into Montana, Wyoming, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. Looks like more thunderstorms for that area for the late weekend and on Monday. And then at the surface, that thunderstorm area in Montana is going to continue moving eastward overnight as an MCS. And then it'll probably die off around Fargo later on. And what we're going to be watching for is new development in southern South Dakota, northwest Nebraska tomorrow during the afternoon. Pretty good storm cluster going up in that region right there. And then by Saturday morning, it's going to be approaching Iowa. And then it looks like the NAM is going for redevelopment in Iowa. And maybe even a little bit of a front. Let's see, what do the frontal systems look like? I think there's a little bit of baroclinicity. There's kind of a low right there, and maybe a little warm front, maybe something like that right there. And then as we roll this forward through Saturday, it looks like a pretty good compact little system moving into Illinois. So maybe Saturday night some thunderstorms in the Chicago area. In fact, it's kind of interesting, the NEM going for a little bit of a deep low there. So maybe a little bit of latent heat, mesoscale convective vortex associated with that. Anyway, the ridge will keep things shut down elsewhere in the plains for Saturday. However, we got this new front coming inland. You can see that very impressive thickness gradient there. It's almost like a different world in Seattle and Portland. In fact, let's pull up a sounding there for Sunday morning in Seattle. And that's definitely a cold, unstable sounding. It's going for a temperature of about 43 there in Seattle. The lapse rate looks moist adiabatic. Lots of moisture there, so this is probably kind of a showery pattern. You can see those westerly winds there. And then we contrast that, of course, with Wyoming. And that's where the warm air is located. We bring that down to the surface. Keep in mind that this is about 3 a.m., but you can see that this supports temperatures easily in the 70s and close to 80 during the day. And then as we roll this forward through Sunday, that cold front is going to be crossing the Rockies. So when we get to the end of the NAM run early on Monday, that front is going to be emerging in the Dakotas and near Denver. And then we'll pick up the GFS and see the rest of the story, as the radio guy Phil Harvey used to say. Where is Monday? Yeah, there's Monday. Yeah, some good consistency between the NAM and the GFS as that front continues rolling out of the northern Rockies. So by Monday, let's look at that setup there. I'm trying to figure out where the warm front is. I guess there might be one there, but let's see yet another front up to the north, up off the top of the chart. So anyway, the cold front is really the big story, and we've got plenty of convergence from Omaha down to Wichita, down to Woodward. So depending on how strong the cap is and how much moisture we have, we could see storms anywhere along that boundary there. So later on Monday, model going for eastern Kansas for storms and maybe a few out around the Altus area, Oklahoma City. Then we take that into Tuesday. It looks like a lot of that frontal system has moved eastward, and that leaves us with a tail end in the Oklahoma and Texas area. That's good for initiation. I'm sure we could squeeze some storms out along that boundary. Interstate 40 area of Oklahoma and Texas, probably some rain there for Tuesday. In fact, MCS. Okay, then for Wednesday, let's see. Boundaries in the Central Plains. Convergence. We got flow from the tropics and flow from the polar regions. So this is about where they meet, right in there, and probably plenty of rain in that area. And also, that tropical cyclone starts making an appearance in the Gulf. Let's see where that takes us. New Orleans. And I'm going to expect that to kind of waver back and forth. So far, we've seen quite a few tracks into western Florida, and now we're seeing one way out here. And we're just going to have to wait several days before we can really pin down where that's going to go. We're still 192 hours out. And I'm not going to be expecting that to really start converging and becoming accurate till we get within about the 5 to 6 day range. So anyway, the landfall does look consistent sometime around Friday or Saturday next week. Okay, the next big change, well, reinforcement of the cold air in the Great Lakes region. It's a pretty good push of cold air. So that'll give some mild temperatures to the mid-Mississippi River Valley, and possibly some storms if we get enough moisture crossing that boundary there. Looks like that might happen up in Nebraska there. And the next big change after that, I don't really see one. Well, some storms there in Oklahoma. Where did that come from? Yeah, it looks like kind of a weak front coming through around the 20th. And then the tail end gets dropped into Texas around the 21st. But, you know, that's pretty far out. That's 336 hours. So we shall see about that. Okay, well, like I said, this is probably going to be a short one. I'm going to try to do that viewer storm photo thing tomorrow. Hopefully things will be a little bit more relaxed. We'll see how that goes. Let's see. Hiker AZ, clouds in Tucson today. Some storms tried their hardest to form. Very good. Michelle Curlin remembers Paul Harvey. Orphan Anvil, yeah, that's pretty much where you only see the top of the CB. It's mostly just cirrus, and it's mostly just a downdraft at that point. The updraft is completely gone. It's the final stage of thunderstorms. All right, that's going to be it for today. I appreciate you watching the webcast. We will be back tomorrow, and maybe we'll see you then. Have a good evening, everybody.